Hello my dear friends and welcome to my channel. My name is Barbara and today we're going to be looking at Saturn in the 4th house. So this video is for you if you do have this placement. If you're a cross watcher, welcome as well. Very excited to be getting into this particular placement. I do have a previous video on Saturn overall. Okay, so if you guys are interested in learning even more about Saturn after this video, you guys can check out that either in the description box below or the comments below. The link will be somewhere there. So very excited to get into this placement. It is an intense placement, I'll tell you guys that much. The 4th house, it does deal with our home, it deals with the mother, and it deals with your family. So your place of security. And Saturn deals with karma. It deals with ancestral things that you're clearing. Okay, it can be something that you're even clearing for the family line, especially when you have Saturn in the 4th house, because it does deal with the family. And it can also deal with the area where you have the most amount of restrictions placed upon you, either when you're growing up or in life overall. But overall, it really is the karma that you're clearing in this lifetime with Saturn. So for those of you who have Saturn in the 4th house, this is not for the faint of heart. You guys grew up in some sort of home where there was either a lot of restriction that was placed upon you at a very early age, some sort of responsibility. It could have been something like you were taking care of maybe your siblings, or maybe you were helping out with the family business. There's always some sort of theme around money and poverty when you do have Saturn in the 4th house, because there basically is that absence of the mother figure, okay? Because Saturn deals with the father, the 4th house deals with the mother. So maybe you had a very masculine leaning mother, or maybe the roles were reversed, okay, in terms of your parents. That's the whole thing here. It could have even been a home where maybe the father was not as prominent, okay? Because again, it's the 4th house, it deals with the mother, whereas Saturn deals with the father. So maybe the roles were reversed, where it's kind of like the father took on more of the feminine role and the mother took on more of maybe the masculine role. Might not apply to everybody, but that's the whole thing here when you do have Saturn in that 4th house. So when you were growing up, there's a huge focus on money, okay? So you do have this embedded within yourself. So this is something that you're really gonna have to work through clearing. Belief systems around money, poverty mentality, lack mentality, scarcity mentality, all these sorts of things. You'll notice how it comes up in a lot of different areas in your life when you do have Saturn in the 4th house. And this wasn't exactly the most nurturing home when you were growing up, okay, when you have Saturn in the 4th house, because again, it's Capricorn. Saturn is Capricorn, whereas the 4th house is ruled by Cancer. It's kind of like reversed if you really look at it. So that's really what's happening here when you have Saturn in the 4th house. It's like there wasn't an amount of love maybe that you on a soul level were seeking when you were growing up in the home. Now, also, this could signify parents who are older or even being raised by grandparents. It really depends on other placements in your natal chart. It can manifest many different ways, but it could have also been absence of parents overall, okay? And you were maybe raised by, like I mentioned, grandparents. Maybe there were babysitters. Maybe there were different family members who were raising you guys. Maybe there were nannies. Whatever way it may have manifested, it's kind of like you didn't get that nurture, okay? The nurturing feeling that you guys were seeking from the mother essentially early on in life. So because of this, you guys probably at an early age, this might not resonate for everybody, but you guys probably ventured off on your own. You guys are used to this responsibility, so you guys have had this responsibility placed upon you from a young age. Maybe you guys didn't really get much of a childhood. Maybe you yourself started working as soon as you were able to start working, because it does deal with the home. Maybe you guys worked really hard to create your own home, okay? Away from this chaos and maybe kind of like this cold energy. That's kind of like that Capricorn energy when you have Saturn in the 4th house. It's like, it's not really that there was an absence of maybe finances. Let's say there wasn't, but there was an absence of love. There's this cold energy that's surrounding the home. So you guys leave, okay? You guys leave early on in life. Now, what's interesting is that because of the fact that Saturn in the 4th house is going to oppose your midheaven, usually around the time that you do have your Saturn return, something can take place where basically your work gets affected and you go back into the home. You go back into the place where you grew up in to resolve these issues, okay? Because there could be a lot of underlying issues that are taking place between you and your caregivers, whoever the original 2 caregivers were for you. So somehow you find yourselves resolving this around your Saturn return, because keep in mind, Saturn is karma, and it's basically something that you've come here to clear in this particular lifetime. That's something important to keep in mind as well. And a lot of the time it does deal with ancestral things. It deals with like a lack of emotions. So maybe when you guys were growing up, you guys struggled with your own emotions. This could have taken place as well. Again, there was just a focus placed on responsibility. The emotions weren't something that anybody maybe even had time to acknowledge for you guys. And a lot of the times what might happen if you have Saturn in the 4th house is you yourselves could have been a very sensitive child. Maybe you guys had this desire for someone to be able to hold space for you guys on an emotional level, and nobody was, so you guys shut down. And it's like, as soon as these things are brought to our attention, we are able to heal them. Now, another thing that's coming through to mention is when you have Saturn in the 4th house, you You guys might struggle with codependency. That's a shadow of Cancer. So Cancer is ruled by the 4th house, and when Cancer is in its shadow, it goes into codependency. Cancer is the most abandoned sign. So different circumstances could have played out here. Maybe there was even, you guys were maybe an orphan growing up, or maybe it was a single parent household. Whatever way, shape, or form that you guys have grown up in, it basically wasn't conventional in the sense where it was like, you know, you're a nuclear family, everyone's happy, everyone's accounted for, you know, there's an abundance of finances within the home, and these types of things. So that's really what's taking place. And on top of all of this, there is the lack of emotional support, lack of love. So you guys might find yourselves shutting down, okay, especially when it comes to expressing your emotions. So this could be a huge thing that you guys work through, or have to work through, or are forced to work through throughout your life. And on top of that, it could be codependency, because that's the whole thing where it's kind of like maybe you guys finally find someone to open up to, and it's like you latch on to that person because of the fear of being abandoned. But unfortunately, if you do struggle with codependency, you might fall into narcissistic dynamics. And it's like, this is something that really does have to be worked through, because these dynamics can turn out to be abusive where it's not balanced. Okay, it's a toxic dynamic. So something to keep in mind if you do have that Saturn in the 4th house. There's also going to be karma surrounding children. Now, I just did the video on Saturn in the 5th house. So the 5th house is more so overall about children, but when you do have the 4th house, it does deal with the home, it does deal with the family. So when it comes to you having your own child, there could be karma around this. So it could be kind of like maybe you had a child at a very early age and this responsibility was placed upon you. It could have been this. Or maybe because you had a lot of responsibility growing up, maybe you were taking care of people around you, maybe you had a lot of siblings, right? Maybe it was a huge household. And it's kind of like now when you grow up, it's kind of like, I don't want any more responsibility. So there's always going to be this whole thing going on with responsibility in your life that you guys might have to work on and address, because this could hold you back in other areas. Now, keep in mind, like I mentioned, it does oppose the midheaven, right? So it's kind of like there's this karma going on where it's like you have to integrate these lessons to basically activate that 10th house midheaven, which is going to be your work, which is going to be your career. And it's kind of like until these issues are resolved, you won't really be able to get the focus that you need, or maybe even the successes that you're looking for in terms of your career, because it's like Saturn's a restriction. That's the thing to understand about Saturn. It's like wherever it is, whatever house it's in, it's placing the restriction on that area. So for you guys, it's the home life. And this is where everything stems from. So it's kind of like whenever there are issues happening in our life, we have to go back and explore and see what kind of upbringing that I have a lot of responsibility placed upon me. And it's kind of like as you move into adulthood, because maybe you had a lot of responsibility placed upon you as a child, you might not want to take on more responsibility. And this might be to your detriment in the sense where it's like you might not be progressing in your career, because it's kind of like when we look at responsibility, it isn't just things like, you know, I'm responsible for this job, or I'm responsible for this child, or I'm responsible for taking care of this sibling. It could be covert areas in your life as well, okay, that you don't realize, where it's kind of like, oh, I just don't want to take on the responsibility of, you know, something like so subtle. I can't really think of an example right now, but it can be things like this, where it's like you have an issue surrounding responsibility because there was a lot that was placed upon you when you were a child, okay? That's that Capricorn energy. It's usually very, very challenging for you guys when you guys are growing up. Thing is, the positive thing here is you're breaking through ancestral curses, ancestral generational traumas, generational things. It's heavy. It's a heavy house. It's a heavy house, I'll tell you guys that much, especially when you go through your Saturn return, which is usually between age 27 to 30, depending on your natal charts. When you go through your Saturn return, there's going to be you dealing with these issues in one way, shape, or form. Maybe you don't go back into the home with your family, maybe it'll be with a partner, but it's like these issues have to be resolved until you guys venture off and go officially into adulthood. You guys kind of can look at your Saturn return as resolving or fixing whatever the childhood was. Now, something really interesting that I learned, and I think it's called the Erickson model in psychology, but don't quote me on that. If I do find it, I'll put it somewhere in the links. But basically what he was saying, there are 8 stages, and don't quote me on that. I think it's 8, okay? I don't know if they've added more, but it's kind of like the whole concept here is he's saying there are 8 stages in life. And it's kind of like when you graduate from the one stage, you're able to go into the next stage and the next stage and the next stage. But he has something that he calls a crisis. It's kind of like when you're in your crisis stage, you can't move on to the other stages. You'll see this a lot of the time when people are healing and working on themselves. It's kind of like a lot of people can be maybe in their 50s or their 60s. They're still in their crisis stage. They haven't integrated whatever that is. So with Saturn in the 4th house, the way that I see it is kind of like the crisis stage is the childhood, okay, the foundations is really what that is. So it's kind of like around your first Saturn return, you kind of go through that whole like basically reworking this is really what that is. Reworking that internal crisis so you guys can move on and officially move into adulthood, I guess, in a more so healthy way. For people who maybe don't learn these lessons, it might catch up in their other Saturn transits. The thing is, I do find that because the planet is at a higher frequency, we are more open to accepting and understanding our lessons. So because of this, it's easier for us to move on to the other stages in life. So a lot of the times around your first Saturn return, you're going to heal and integrate these aspects of you. But that's the thing, there's no escaping the Saturn return. Unfortunately, it's kind of like you have to integrate these lessons so you can officially move on, and especially in terms of, again, the midheaven, because that's the opposition here. So I do hope that you guys did enjoy my video on Saturn in the 4th house. If you guys did, please do like, share, and subscribe, and I hope you all have a beautiful rest of the day.